Seth, welcome back.
Oh, I'm back. Thank you. It's good to be here. I thought we were just hanging out, you and me.
I adore you to the moon and back. Thank you for being in the world and doing what you do.
Well, thank you. The world is totally upside down. There's so much trauma, and the only way we're going to make things better is by making things better. So if I can help people turn on the light and let them turn on the light for other people, that was a good day.
Yeah, and you do that. You do that consistently. Okay, so let's talk about your new stunning piece of work, The Practice. I see it behind you on the shelf there. Let's talk about a few of the things that this book really dials in. You talk about learning to trust yourself, coming back to the person you seek to be, finding your voice. What does that mean to you to really do the work that matters, to find the work that we're assigned to do?
My take doesn't match what most people say, so I will try it this way. You are not entitled to an audience that appreciates you. You are not entitled to get paid for the work that you believe you were born to do. And that if you want to have a hobby, you should do it just for you. And it should be whatever the muse tells you you're supposed to do. But if you want to be a professional, if you want to ship creative work, if you want to make change happen, we have to begin with the fact that you're doing it for other people. And there is no such thing as what you were born to do. And there is no such thing as the muse. There's no such thing as external inspiration. It's a choice. If you decide to serve a small, viable audience of people who trust you, who are waiting for you, who are interested in where you are going, enrolled in the journey, and you do it for them, either they'll get the joke and you can do it again, or they won't get the joke, in which case you have to do it better. And then we repeat the process. And so they call it creative work because it's work, not because it's a gift.
It's so stunning. And it's probably the thing that I repeat most, which I learned from you, which is that business is radical empathy. And wow, do we need that in this world, in this moment? Look at this world and the leadership of this world, and radical empathy, two words that are probably missing most. And when you just began to share what you shared, you said it's opposite of what a lot of people say. Why is that so? Why is it that when we're growing up, people say the question is, what do you want to do when you grow up versus what problem can you solve or how can you serve? Why is it so novel? How come we're not getting that? What's the big shift that we have to do to really get in alignment with this?
It's a two-part shift. And the first part is that industrialism has ruled our whole lives. Even if I was 120, that would be true. Industrialism is a place where you go and do what you're told. And there you have a manager who wants you to do it faster and cheaper than you did it last time. And it made us all the richest people who ever lived, right? It gave us roads and cars and factories and clothing that, you can buy a wedding dress by Federal Express for $80. All of those things happen because we are cogs in a system, and we built school for that. And so we start with, will this be on the test? Do I have to do this? What am I being told to do? And then we inserted, just to keep people from going crazy, follow your dream. We inserted find your voice. And the problem is we don't want to be on the hook. We don't want to be on the hook to announce our thing, because if it doesn't come true, it's on us. And so we bury that thing we call our dream and keep it a dream, as opposed to turning it into a practice. And the practice says, I might not be entitled to be the ballerina who's dancing with Mikhail Baryshnikov. I might not be entitled to match whatever fantasy I had when I was 7, but I'm capable of having a practice, of showing up to make a promise and keep it, and to do it without a boss, to be my own boss, whether I have a job or not, where I decide what I want to stand for. But all the time we're trying to get off the hook. And I think it's better to be on the hook. Being on the hook is the best place I can imagine being.
It's so true. And I hear you talk about that all the time. So when we had this conversation the last time you were here, and every time you're here is just such a gift with a capital G, I said, well, what is this calling, this thing called purpose? And you said, I don't really love that question because I could be teaching canoeing in the Canadian mountains, or I could be teaching marketing, and that's what I do. And what you just said is something along the lines of, well, maybe I could have a dream, but I'd have to show up and be on the hook, right? And do something. So how do we marry the two? How do we find something we love to do then, if it's possible, but yet find a way to serve and offer value with that thing? Or is it just pick something that you know how to solve a problem around, like marketing, whether or not it's your dream? Because what you just said is maybe you could do something that you love, but you'd have to be on the hook. How do we kind of figure that out?
Two parts, I guess. Again, first part is it's way more convenient and direct and easy to love what you do than it is to do what you love.
Mm.
And there's nothing that people want to do now that existed 300 years ago, right? Like what I love, I would love to be an Instagram influencer with 5,000 followers. Well, Instagram didn't even exist 20 years ago. So please don't tell me that that's what you were born to do, because you weren't. What you're actually seeking is an emotion. You're not seeking a job description. So what's the emotion? Oh, you'd like to be respected, treated with dignity, have a little bit of leverage for a circle of people who trust you. That I can find 100 ways you can do that, right? There's a waitress at the diner who has that. So if you choose to fall in love with the work, as long as the work matches the emotional setting that you're looking for, you've made huge progress toward where you want to go, right? And one of the problems that a lot of people have, for those of us who have been privileged enough to get the benefit of the doubt and be able to make a living without digging ditches or something, is we get trapped because we think we want one thing, like make a lot of money. And then we're surprised that we go to work for an investment bank and they want us to do things that feel immoral. Well, maybe those things go together. And maybe you can't have both at the same time.
Let's talk about why this book right now. You've written so many books, you've said so much. What made you want to write this book and say these things?
So I don't do any consulting or coaching, but I love to hang out with people like you who I admire and who I can pontificate with and who maybe I can chime in. And what I found is that the number of people who need nuanced insight into how permission marketing works, or need to get deeper into the finer points of understanding status roles, is very small. That people keep getting hung up on the same things, and they're about choices. They're about having a voice, trusting themselves. And so every once in a while, I try to write a book that's directly about that way of thinking, mostly selfishly, because I can hand someone a book and say, read this and then we'll talk. But
Right.
but also partly because, you know, the workshops that I've run for the last 5 years at Akimbo, which is now an independent B Corp, I'm proud to say, I get to watch people interact. So when I built the Creatives Workshop, 500 people took it. They gave and received 500 pieces of feedback per person per month. And I had to watch all of it going back and forth. And if you're an author, what a treat to be able to see the work before you have to write it down. It was huge. And I said, watching this unfold, there's a whole bunch of people who won't put in the 100 days to take a workshop, but maybe I can come to them with something in a package that makes it easier for them to get the joke.
It's so good. It's so, and it is so true. Like these are the things that people do ask about all of the time. And in a few sections of the book, you talk about imposter syndrome because that comes up over and over and over again. What's your go-to response for that when people are caught up in that?
Yeah, and I know you get asked about it a lot.
Constantly. Yeah.
I say good for you. It means you're doing the work. If you don't feel like an imposter, you're either lazy or you're a sociopath. That if you are leading, if you are doing something that hasn't been done before, if you're making something creative, something new, something important, you will feel like an imposter because you're faking it. You've never actually done this before. So You know, when you leave the recording studio and your album is done and you say, I made a new album, I'm going to offer it to my fans, it's going to be great. Well, you don't know it's going to be great. You just did your best. So when imposter syndrome shows up, I think the response is thank you. Thanks for letting me know I worked hard today. Don't try to make it go away because that will make you less of who you are. Embrace it and realize that it's just like running a marathon and getting tired. Being tired is not a defect. Being tired is a symptom that you ran a good race.
Right. It's so true. It's kind of like when you say just dance with the fear as opposed to expecting that you're going to start once the fear goes away. It's like, I love that shift. And you said before that when people took this workshop, they got all of this feedback. And you talk about how criticism and feedback are not the same. Can you talk about that?
Lots of people will give you criticism. The ones who care about you will do it because they're trying to protect you from something. The ones who don't care about you will do it because they're trying to work out their own issues, their own fear, their own dynamic. So J.K. Rowling and Harper Lee have both gotten more one-star reviews on Amazon than I have, but that's because they've gotten more reviews than I have. And all a review with 1 star of To Kill a Mockingbird means is this book wasn't for me. It doesn't mean it's a bad book. And so to read that, if Harper was around, would be a mistake because it's not going to help her write a better book. All it says is it wasn't for me. All right, I get it, right? You're a vegan. You went to a steakhouse, 1 star. They serve steak. Yeah, all right, it's not for you. So we have to begin by acknowledging who's our smallest viable audience. Who are the people who we actually are serving? And then the second thing is, are they good at giving feedback or are they bad at it? Because most people are bad at it. They get awkward. They don't use the right words. They've never been in your shoes. So they can't tell you what it would mean to, they don't have domain knowledge that would help you see what you need to see. So we ignore those people too. And then we're left with this other group, people who are aligned with you, people who are enrolled, and people who are good at it. Those people, it's precious. Do not ignore them. They are giving you a gift to be embraced. And it has been a lot of work for me to stretch to the point where I could do that. This is a specific example. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I wrote a book called All Marketers Are Liars. And it's a terrible title. It's the worst title I've ever put on a book. And it cost me a lot of impact in sales for a book I'm really proud of. My publisher said, I don't think that's a good title. And I said, what do you know? I'm ignoring your criticism. I'm going to call it that. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm listening to the voice inside. Well, this book was called Trust Yourself. In fact, I bought trustyourself.com and there's an excerpt of the book there. And Nikki, my editor, said, I think there's a better title. And this time I said, that's why I'm here, Nikki, because you know better than me, because you have touched more books than I have, because you have thought about this without getting confused the way I get confused because it's my book. So yes, Nikki, we're going to change the title. And that was a big 10-year period of me learning who to listen to and how to listen to them.
What does that mean to you to trust yourself? How do we do that and yet be on the hook to serve at the same time?
Yeah. So Kathy, do you ever talk to yourself?
Yes.
When you talk to yourself, who's talking and who's listening?
That's such a good question. I guess that there's the part of me that's the spinning thoughts, and then the part of me that's sort of like the connected to what's really me.
Exactly. And we use phrases like that all the time without thinking about the fact that we're asserting there's 2 things in our head, but there are. And trust yourself means that other voice, the one that's grounded, that has an instinct, that wants to lead, you've been censoring it, beating it up, avoiding it, weaseling out of whatever it needs to do for a very long time. But if we could trust that that path might be better than the one we're on, there's no guarantee it's going to work, but it will probably work better than our reverse engineered hack that we usually rely on will work. And so I'm being really clear, there's no guarantee, but the practice is about letting the voice out, looking at it, seeing if it's genuine in the sense that it will serve the people you care about. And if so, shipping the work. And finding a way to do that. People go to enormous lengths. They invent writer's block. They drink too much. They have a shrine. They build candles. They go for a long, they have 10,000 methods because it's so frightening in our industrialized culture to let that voice be heard. But if you don't try it, you'll never know.
It's interesting. David Lynch was here about a month ago.
How cool is that?
That was cool. And I said to him, for people who want to have 1 ounce of your success with their creative writing or filmmaking, what's your suggestion? And he said, trust yourself, right? And we start talking about getting beyond the noise. And, he's so into TM, obviously, and dropping in. And I said, but you've been successful, right? Like if people eventually liked what you did, and if somebody wants to actually make money and have a career and get the show on, have the Twin Peaks and all the things. And he said, no. He said, I'm just saying, trust yourself. Who cares if anyone likes it? And you're not necessarily going to be known for it, but trust yourself. But the Seth Godin approach is serve people. Don't worry sometimes about your own creative juices. If you want to actually have a business, it is about what people want. And so those are 2 really difficult things to hold simultaneously. So what do we do with that? How do we trust ourselves? And yet, as much as I love David Lynch, my audience wants to make a career, wants to be,
exactly.
So what do you think about that?
Juicy. Super juicy. And just for the audience at home, did we practice this? We did not. Okay. So Twin Peaks, okay, small personal aside. When I was really struggling with my business for like 8 years, I wanted to take on a nice trip, but I couldn't afford very much of anything. And it was right at the peak of Twin Peaks with that great soundtrack and everything.
So good.
And so I put together this whole little puzzle thing, and she figured out that I was taking her to Snoqualmie Lodge in Washington for the weekend. And she told her law firm, this is where she was going to be. We had the music thing. And then we got to the airport and we flew to Paris instead. And so I have a soft spot in my heart for Snoqualmie Lodge where I have never been. So with that said, we need to talk about genre, and we need to talk about how transgressive can you be, because who is the audience you are seeking to serve? David Lynch understands the domain. David Lynch has seen more movies and television shows than you and me and 10 other people put together. He understands how to make film. He paid all of those dues. He also understood that when you're going to a network like ABC, maybe, just maybe, you can earn a hearing and you can show up, but you can't be too out of the box or you won't get on television. And you can't be too in the box or they won't bother working with you.
Right.
You got to be on the edge of the box. He understood and intentionally manufactured something that was right on the edge of the box, just barely tolerable by the executives, because he knew if he could get through that hole, that there was a group of people, and it wasn't that many, who would say, this is the best TV show I ever saw. But most of the audience didn't think it was the best TV show they ever saw, which was fine, because in those days, ABC simply needed 30 million loyal, that's 10% of the population, who wouldn't give it up, right? So almost everything he's done since then has appealed to a smaller group of people.
Right.
And he's fine with that because he's still trying to dance in between the two. So he makes very few things that no one wants to see. He makes nothing that everyone wants to see. But because he understands genre and the domain, because he has the craft, he can navigate in between the two, right? And the same thing's true for any musician you've ever heard of. They, if Lou Reed had made Walk on the Wild Side 10 years earlier or 10 years later, nothing. You need to have the vision and the ear to say, the people I'm trying this for, they'll get this joke. And you're wrong a lot, but you're right more than people who aren't trying to do that.
That makes so much sense. And it is so important that people hear that. And when it comes to what you keep going back to, which is the people you're trying to serve, the people you're trying to serve, the people you're making this for, I think my audience is trying to serve everybody. I think that's the big pitfall, right? So how the heck do we have a point of view and decide to serve one piece of the market? How do we choose who that piece is? And do we how do we start to feel safe that that's not limiting ourselves, but actually creating what's more unlimited for us?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic insight because it's true. And the reason people want to serve everyone is they think it's because they're being generous, but actually it's because they don't want to be on the hook.
Right.
That if you pick who exactly it's for and they don't like it, now you have a real problem, right? So if you open a diner, if someone doesn't like it, someone else will come along. But if you open an Ethiopian restaurant in a town that doesn't have one, only people who like Ethiopian food are going to come. If they don't like it, you're toast. And so what we've got to be able to do is find the wherewithal to say that the best way to serve is to be specific. So, my wife now owns perhaps the biggest craft gluten-free, dairy-free bakery in America. And if you call her up and say, do you have anything that's sugar-free, doesn't have eggs in it, and this and this, she says, no, but you could buy a banana at the convenience store next door. She says this with full respect, but the point is, if you don't like this selection, this place is not for you. And what's happened in social media, which most people have completely missed, is it is not a mass medium. There is not one thing on YouTube that will be seen as many times today as Twin Peaks was when it was on television. Not one out of the billions of things that are on. That the typical song on iTunes gets listened to 5 times. 5, right? It's a long tail. So it's a micro medium. It's specific. If you can say, I was just watching something 2 weeks ago about how to sharpen a chisel, and 100,000 people had seen it. That's a massive home run, right? But if you don't have a chisel or you like a dull chisel, this isn't for you. This is for a very specific group of people, and it's the best version of that. So who exactly is the thing you're doing for? Because if you just want to be an Instagram influencer with, the clever garb and the good lighting, with lots and lots of people who say they love you, that can be your hobby. But I don't think that's what you should devote your working life to, because it's not specific and it's going to break your heart.
That makes so much sense. And so for people who are trying on new things and trying to validate and test an idea, how do they know? What's the best process to know who the people are that you're trying to serve? What would you suggest that people do? Try something, let a few people sample it, because I think it's hard for people to figure out what niche to choose.
Yeah, right. And again, it's hard because you don't want to be on the hook. You don't want to fail. So we begin by acknowledging you will fail, and you will fail, and you will fail. And it doesn't cost very much to fail. And I had a riff, and I don't think it ended up in the book, about bowling in Buffalo, New York, where I grew up. Bowling was a big deal, and your parents would drop you off at a very young age at the bowling alley for hours, unsupervised. And it was like $1 a game, which meant that it was 8 cents a roll if you did well at the last few frames. Otherwise, it's 10 cents a roll, or 5 cents because there's 2 per frame. But every once in a while, there was unlimited bowling. And unlimited bowling was one fee for all the games you could play. I loved unlimited bowling because it let you experiment. Each roll didn't matter that much because it was free, right? Okay, so with that said, then we have to realize you don't have to make work that's for you. You don't have to be a cancer survivor to be an oncologist. You don't have to be a woman to be an OBGYN, right? It might help, but it's not required. And so you make an assertion. And the assertion is, there is a group of people who believe this, who are dealing with that, who might want this. You just say those assertions out loud. Who are these people? What do they dream of? Are there others like them? And then you figure out what your boundaries are. your constraints, because you can't succeed if there are no constraints. You won't get anywhere. You have to say, all right, my constraints are I have this much time, or I have this much money, or I will use these tools, but not these tools. And within that thing, just like David Lynch, now you have boundaries, right? And as much as creators love to complain about the censors are their friend, because it lets them go right to the end of transgressive without having to run an X-rated movie. If there were no censors, it would be a race to the bottom. So within that, we then say, all right, has anyone else ever gone on a journey like this one? Now, it's entirely possible someone listening to this will do something that has never been done before, and I applaud them. But most people, including me, are going on journeys that others have gone on before. People have started companies before I started my internet company. I was early internet company, but there were people who gone before me. People had sold books to publishers before I sold a book to a publisher. Is there a path? Has this ever existed before? And then you say, all right, what's different about my approach to the path that keeps me from just saying, me too, me too, me too? It doesn't have to be completely original, no points for that, but it has to be interesting enough to be worth seeking out, to be one to search for, to look for. And just a quick aside on this, frequently people will get frustrated because they say, I can't win on Google. I want anyone who types in locksmith to find me, anyone who types in podcast to find me. And it's like, that's never going to happen again. What you want is to get people to type in Kathy Heller, because if they're looking for you, they're going to find you. And that means you have to become the kind of person, the kind of contribution that people search for by name. And the more specific you are, the more likely it is that that will happen.
Oh my God, this might be one of the very best things that's ever been said on this show. And I just love it so much. It's so powerful. And what you're saying that I think my audience for sure needs to hear is not only do you need to figure out the people you're serving, but what problem do they have that you're solving? Really, really. And I love how you're saying, find a group of people and make an assertion. And can I help you solve this problem? And often I'm talking to people, we have, over 500 people in our made to do this program right now. And we work on coming up with the idea and going from idea to income in 12 weeks. And to get them to tell me, when I say, tell me what the value is, who it's for, and what's the promise of your offer. It's so vague. The promise is so big and it's so vague. So how do they, is it just putting a stake in the ground and trying one thing, saying, I'm going to go for this problem and try to solve it this way and seeing if that works. And if it doesn't, find a slightly different problem or a slightly different answer to the problem? How do they do that? Because it really is hard for people to make that leap.
Okay. So let's veer into this is marketing territory for just a little bit, because I think it's helpful. The first thing to understand is you have been seduced, not you, but your readers have been seduced into believing that if they're not on the cover of Inc. magazine or they don't go public, they're a failure. And those weird edge case businesses are weird. You're not going to build one of those. You're going to build a valid, useful, small business that's not famous. That's fine. And it might get big. So let's talk about Tom's shoes for a minute. Every single person who ever bought a pair of Tom's shoes in the United States already owned a pair of shoes, which means Blake was not selling shoes to shoeless people. So if you say, why did someone buy a pair of shoes? The answer is not they needed shoes, because they didn't need shoes. So what actually did they need? Let's get to the base emotion that he was trying to get at. What they needed was the pleasure that comes from being the first of your friends to buy a fashion accessory, because everyone's vain a little bit. And this is a nice feeling. I discovered this. But how could they feel even better about it? Their friends need to notice. They don't want to bring it up. They want to get asked. How to solve that problem? Put a logo on shoes. Almost no one had ever done that before. Tom's put a logo on shoes, not sneakers, but shoes. Okay, fine. But then this is the coup de grace. This is the key to the whole thing.
Love you.
When someone says to you, because you got some chips on your shoulder, because Muffy and Binky and all your other friends, they been lording the fact that they have more resources than you, and you only got $80 to spend on a shoe, but you're hoping for some social status. They say, nice shoes. And you say, really? I'm a philanthropist too. Because buying these shoes, a kid far away also has a pair of shoes. You got a story to tell. So that's what they sold. They sold status, they sold a thrill, and they sold a story. Who did they sell it to? Just 1 million women. That's all, 500,000 women. But because they all were eager to tell the story, the word spreads. So let's say you're Lori Kopp. Here's a Lori Kopp mug right here. She wants to make pottery. She loves making pottery. This is a long time ago. I don't know what she's doing right now. And how does she sell her mugs? Well, everyone who buys mugs already has a mug. Where are they going to buy a mug? They're going to a gift shop. When you go into a gift shop, what problem do you have, right? Well, you're looking for something that speaks to you in a certain way, that tells you a certain kind of story. Are there other mugs there? Yes. So why will I buy this one? What is it about this, right? And decoding that into a consistent story that you can patiently persist with gives you a practice. And then over time, you go from having one thing to a line of things, et cetera. So I could riff about this all day.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. And your storytelling workshop is coming up for enrollment very soon, right?
Yeah, Bernadette's. And she teaches a lot of this. I just have to correct, Lori's last name is Coop, not Cop. Sorry, Lori.
Okay. Thank God you corrected that. She would never have forgiven you. So the story skills workshop, I mean, you only do things that you think are super important. And I know that Bernadette teaches it, but it's something that it's part of your overall umbrella. It's within that. Let's go into what you just said, because it was so gorgeous. It was like listening to a symphony. It's so epic what you just said. So how do people start to really understand what the story is that they're telling and what's the DNA? And then we'll definitely put the link to the story workshop, because it's coming up right after this episode airs.
Okay, so stories are the basic human technology. Before we had anything, before we had fire, any of those things, we had stories. That's how we see the world. And a story is not a collapse, and it is not a fairy tale. It is something in between the two. And the way you get good at stories, maybe you do it by reading one of Bernadette's 7 bestsellers, but probably you do it by practicing. And I know, I've been giving a lot of talks online since the pandemic hit, and I get 1/10 out of them that I got when I was doing them live. Because when you're doing it live in the room, you're seeing which parts of which stories resonate with people. Human beings are experts at this. We can even tell when we're boring our dog, right? That the moment we start to lose something, we can feel it. And if you can practice that in a setting like an Akimbo workshop, oh, I'm going to tell another story today and another story tomorrow and another story the day after that. So your story, I could come up with words for the story of your podcast, but that wouldn't do it justice. Your podcast is about colors and feelings and emotions and endorphins and all of these things that run through people. And ultimately, stories come down to life and death, joy, suffering, and status, right? Things that are not, that are timeless, that have been around for thousands of years. And Julius Caesar told stories, and you're telling stories. And the only question is, what are you hoping people will do to relieve the tension, right? Are you saying you can relieve the tension in the army and going overseas to fight? Or can you relieve the tension by buying this pair of shoes? But whatever it is we're trying to change, we tell a story, we create tension, and then we give people a way to relieve the tension.
You're literally a songwriter. Every time you answer a question, I can tell you're answering it for the first time. And it's so this like divine download. It's like you speaking is like meditation. It's just, you're so in the moment. It's such a gift.
Well, you're very
to
kind.
listen to you speak.
If I am Bernie Taupin, you must be Elton John.
I love you. It's so, so good. And I love this, like, how can you help them relieve the tension, right? And really, instead of worrying about your funnel, worry concern yourself with this story and what tension they need to relieve them, to be relieved of. And what happens though when you think to yourself, but I don't have a good story to tell? I mean, this is what I see with people all the time. I'm not qualified enough. I haven't learned enough. I'm not interesting enough. Where do we go to find the story that we're telling? How can we look through what's here and know which parts to pick out?
You probably don't have a story yet. And, your honesty counts for a lot. And the question is, where are you going to start? My friend, the late, great Sir Ken Robinson,
Oh, amazing.
gave a TED talk that got seen by 4 billion people or whatever it was. That's not how he started. Sir Ken started by teaching 7-year-olds or whatever it was. And it's a lot safer to go try your material out on 27-year-olds. That when he and I gave our first TED Talks, no one told us they were recording them. And no one told us they were going to be on the internet. And so it was much easier to say, oh, there's only 3 people in the room. How can I be here for them? And then the next one and the next one. So if you're having trouble telling a story in a commercial way on the internet, why don't you start by going down to the kindergarten that is, sheltering in place at a distance and tell a story to those kids? Why don't you start by finding 3 people in your town who are dispossessed or disconnected or need a helping hand and tell a story to them? That we don't start by saying, I got a Google keyword strategy and this thing, and then they hook up to my MailChimp thing. We start by saying, I just looked some people in the eye and I told them a story and it made a difference to them. And then we would do it again and again and again. And I've seen the talks I gave in 1989 and 1994. They're not very good because I was still warming up. And I think I'm still warming up in the sense of there are a lot of things I haven't explored in places I want to take it. If I hadn't done 1,000 speeches, I don't think you would feel like I'm telling a story for the first time.
It literally just brought tears to my eyes because I think about the two of you and Sir Ken Robinson, and how you've just been in it for the long haul. Like, this is just who you are. And there's not a feeling of, I need an immediate ROI. This is me waking up every day to do the good work that I was meant to do. And you talk about in this new book, and you talk about it so often, really like showing up for the process and the part of us that needs certainty so badly, and how that really is such a pitfall. And I think that what you just said really hits on it. I mean, so often people, they'll tell me they want to start a podcast. They do 7 episodes and they're done, and I'm like, look, I've done 350 episodes. It took a minute to get to 20 million downloads. Like, I had to be willing. And there's this feeling of, it's almost that there's such shame around not being an immediate success that they can't bear staying in it. Right. But we have to change our relationship to the process. And you talk about trusting the process. And so how can we let go of that need for immediate validation and certainty? Because that's really a huge, huge issue, I think, standing in the way.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because there's also shame with being an immediate success. I think that Rickie Lee Jones regrets often that her first album was what it was. Because now every time she performs, people want her to be a cover act of who she used to be, right? And what a privilege to develop your work in an out-of-town tryout over time to discover what really resonates for you. And getting hooked on the outcome is a really big problem, particularly in our culture. Will this be on the test? What does that mean? It means I'm only willing to pay attention to what you're saying if you promise me an A later, right? That in the factory setting, don't bother doing anything if it's not going to make us a profit today. And real work, the practice is, what would you do even if you knew it was going to fail? What would be worth doing even then? And we chop that wood and we carry that water and we get the chance to do it again. And so every podcast that I know of, including yours, started with 10 listeners, just 10. And you got to stick it out. And if you're not prepared to do 100 episodes, don't start a podcast. Just don't. It's not worth it. And the same thing is true for public speaking. The same thing is true for writing. The same thing is true for blogging. The same thing is true for being a cook or a chef or a restaurant owner. if you're not prepared to have this series of learnings that some people call failure, you're going to get hooked on the outcome, and that's going to ruin your work.
That is just so important. It's so gorgeous. It's so important. And that's really why you guys all need to buy this book, because this really is, when you said that, I love that saying, chop wood, carry water, just get up and keep doing it. But I think people really believe that if it's not an immediate success, that the practice wouldn't matter, that they wouldn't wind up becoming brilliant at it. Do you think that they would, or do you think that not necessarily?
Do I think that they will become successful if they stick it out?
Yeah.
No, almost certainly not. But if they don't stick it out, I guarantee you will not be successful. So those are your only two choices. Right? And if you pick a small enough viable audience that you can see them, feel them, hear them, your odds go way up, way up. If you're a wedding photographer and you do 100 weddings a year, you're the busiest wedding photographer in town with 100. Right? So we're being really clear here that almost everybody doesn't need many people to be able to do work they are proud of. But we get distracted because it feels safer to say, I need more. No, actually what you need is better. And better is hard to acknowledge because that's up to you, whereas more is up to the audience. And I would like to bring it back on you and say, you don't know what the right answer is, but you have a process. And you know that there are people who have a problem they're eager to connect around, a story they want to hear. It's not like you have to build a car factory and then launch the Edsel and lose $1 billion. The cost of being wrong is very small, but it does mean you have to show up and you have to play a longer game.
And what does it mean for people who don't really get it? What is shipping the work mean? And what does it mean to ship great work? And how do we get to that place where the work is actually great that we're shipping?
Okay, so a few ways to talk about this. Let's start with the word great. Perfect doesn't exist, and perfectionism is your enemy because perfectionism is a way to hide. So if I take a car like a Lexus, which is generally considered the highest quality car, and look at any part with an electron microscope, it is not perfect. It's filled with little tiny scars and things that aren't there, but its quality is very high because it meets spec. And meeting spec and perfect are different things. You know what we call something that meets spec? Good enough. And good enough means it's good enough. Now, if you think good enough means lousy, you need to redefine what good enough is, right? So when you made that podcast with David Lynch, you shipped it because it was good enough.
Yeah.
It wasn't perfect, but it was classic Kathy Heller. That's the definition of good enough. And then we stop and we ship the work. Making it better than spec is a waste for everybody. Now, if you need spec to be, it's all better than the competition, the way Lexus was compared to Chevy, make that the spec. Make the spec whatever you want. But then when you hit the spec, you ship the work. Because if it doesn't ship, it doesn't count. You need to be able to say to the market, I made this. And then you need to listen to what the market says when you do that. If you don't, you have a hobby. I love hobbies. There's nothing wrong with hobbies, but don't pretend your hobby is your job.
I love when you just said perfectionism is just a way to hide, and it's so true. And you have to just ship the work. And I also love something else I've heard you say, which is that average means half of your blog posts are below average. I'm like, not yours, Seth, not yours. And you're like, no, mine too. That's what average means. You got to ship the work. It's so brilliant. It's so simple, but it does the thing that you said a few times, which is it puts you on the hook.
Yeah.
And why is that so damn scary to be on the hook? Why can't we just do it? What is that all that resistance about to being on the hook?
Particularly for women, but I would say for everyone. Blame sits right next to shame, and shame is the dream killer. Shame is the emotion, the unexplored emotion that has changed so much of our lives. And we just don't want to be in the room with shame. But if we can't get blamed, we could avoid shame. And we don't want to get blamed, so therefore we don't want to be on the hook. Don't blame me. I just did what I was told. And if you've ever heard someone saying to you, I was just doing my job, that's the way they deflect blame. And what it means to ship creative work is, please blame me. I made this. And you have to accept the feedback, not as you did a shameful act if it didn't work, but maybe you did it for the wrong person, or maybe you didn't understand what would have worked in that moment. And so, Twin Peaks really touched me. The video I saw David do 3 weeks ago, meh, I lasted 3 minutes. I turned it off. David should feel no shame about that. He brought something to the world and it wasn't for me, but he will learn if he wants to before he makes the next thing.
You're so brilliant. I was just, I had Dan Harris on the podcast, and he's done all this meditation, of course, and sat with the Dalai Lama and everything else. And I said, so what's at the eye of the lotus here? What's at the heart of this? And he said, shame. It's all shame. And that's the poison. And I told him that my mindfulness teacher always says, when you wake up in the morning and you have a glass key, you should invite all parts of yourself to the table, the parts of you that self-sabotage, the parts of you that are broken, the parts of you, all of it, just welcome it in. And you just hit it right there. Like, this is what Seth, this is what he's been trying to uncover with like absolute laser focus. And he's like, I just realized it's just shame. And you just said it. And you've been doing a million other things at the same time other than meditation. And that's it. It's shame. So how do we allow ourselves to be who we are, our messy selves, and show up and do the work we're supposed to do?
So I'll tell you my shortcut. It might not work for everybody. Did you, when you were growing up, get your WSI, your Red Cross certification in swimming?
Oh, but I was on the swim team. But no, I never did that.
So the swim team is a fine example. When you're swimming in the swim team, the coach has plenty to say about your flutter kick, plenty to say about how you're breathing, etc. 3 months later, you got your summer job and a kid starts drowning 4 feet in front of you. Do you say, well, I'm not the most qualified lifeguard. Surely there's someone better than me to do this? No, because you are 4 feet away. You jump in the water. And when you jump in the water and you go to save that kid, did you do the perfect cross-body carry? Did you do the mouth-to-mouth in a way that was beyond reproach? Of course not. But the kid's okay. You saved the kid's life. And we should not spend our days worrying about our flutter kick when there's someone we can save. And I don't do work that involves life or death. And I don't think you do either, but that's okay. We're still lifeguards. And if you're there for other people, not to hustle, not to figure out how to, make enough money so you can retire, but there because you're actually going to help somebody get to where they are going, that's a generous act. It's not about you, it's about them. And that seems to me to make it a lot easier to deal with the feelings of shame that arise. It's like, okay, fine, but that person's not dead. Okay, fine, but that person moved forward. So yeah, I've made countless mistakes, mostly errors of omission, things I should have done, things I should have said, things I should have led. But all I can do is try to help the next person.
That also brought tears to my eyes because I know my listeners so well and they needed to hear that. And because I think that old quote is so true that most men live lives of quiet desperation. I don't think people think that they're needed, Seth. I don't think people think that they have anything to contribute. I think that that's what's at the heart of it. So it has to be perfect and they need more credentials and they need to work for somebody else and whatever they have, there is so much shame because they focus on all the things that they think are broken and they don't know that simply just making space for another person or doing their absolute best is adding something to the tapestry. How do you help? Because you do it so well. And I don't know if you know that you do it, but you make people feel seen just because you are so present that I think people just watching you speak, reading your books, they feel themselves there because you speak right to people. You give such people such dignity just in who you are. But how do you help people really get that memo that you really do have something to contribute? And so your best is an important thing to do for the day.
I don't think, well, let me conjugate what I heard. You're not asking how Seth Godin does that. You're asking how one does that.
Yeah. Like, well, how do you help people to know that, to have certainty around like that, the fact that they are needed, like, I don't think people think deeply that they really are needed. Like everybody else on the block should go out for the day and be productive, but like who needs their little life or their little point of view or whatever? I do think people don't really believe in that so much.
I'm not going to get the facts quite right, but there was a woman in Texas who, according to 7-Eleven, sold more cups of coffee than any person who would ever work for them. And when she retired, hundreds of people turned out to wish her well because she remembered everyone's name. She had a nice thing to say every single time they came in. It's just a cup of coffee, but it's not just a cup of coffee. You can get your caffeine much more easily a different way. People would go out of their way to come have this woman look them in the eye and say, "Have a great day, Steve." So why don't we just start with that, right? Why don't we just start with, if you're feeling lonely, afraid, if you're feeling like the world isn't as bright as it could be, maybe somebody else is as well. And what would happen if you called them up or wrote them a letter or simply did something generous? Not cheap, not giving things away. That's not what generous means. Generous means expending emotional labor on behalf of someone else. I've been in your shoes. That's what human beings wake up every morning needing to hear. And we're never going to solve that problem, but every day we can do a little bit to make it a little better.
And this is so, so crucial because this episode is coming out election week. And I think we believe that it's all in the hands of somebody else, as opposed to if every one of us was on the hook to lead today in our community, with our neighborhood. We would fix a lot. We would solve a lot. And so your words are very powerful, what you just said. And I think sort of, closing out here, I think part of the problem though, is that when people go to do it, and you just sort of said, and don't do it for free, it's like, I already have so many misgivings about my worth. So to then charge for it, I'm just going to go back to sleep, because who am I to charge for it and sell it? Then I really have to be on the hook and believe that it's worth something. And therefore, I'm going to go back to like just, fighting with somebody on Facebook about politics and working at a job I hate, because if I'm going to be on the hook and sell, I don't think I can handle that. And you say in this new work that selling is the dance between possibility and empathy, and it's about turning the you into the we. Just close out with that, because this is really where the biggest resistance comes up. If I have someone in my audience and they come up with something, once they actually go to sell it, they just go right back, because that resistance is too much.
It's real. Let's start with some real clear facts. Inside the Akimbo workshops, I don't do it anymore, but the organization gives scholarships to nonprofits and people like that. People who get a free scholarship are 5 times more likely to drop out than people who pay. Wow. Every time, 5 times more likely. And the reason is simple. Because if you paid, you're on the hook, you're enrolled, you are counting on something, sunk costs are real. If you had a choice between someone who's going to say, yeah, I'll give you surgery for free when I get around to it, or a real surgeon, you're going to go to a real surgeon because you want them to feel that obligation. So part of the gift of commerce, of the marketplace, is if you care enough about this to pay for it, I care enough about this to me and make you a promise. And that also gives people dignity. That also treats them as a partner. And so I've been working with Acumen for 15 years, and Acumen has shown again and again that there's a really big difference between tossing someone a bag of rice and making them dependent on you showing up next week versus selling them a sewing machine so they can make enough money to buy all the rice they'll ever need, right? That opening the door for somebody to engage with commerce gives them power, because now they have the power to say no. And you have the power to learn that what you offered wasn't worth as much as you thought it was. And so that in itself is a generous act. Now, not everything should cost money, for sure. But yes, you need to make a living, and putting yourself on the hook while you make a living, that can be a generous act.
Oh, that was so well said. The idea of like, we'll make you this promise, right? And that's really what you're doing. And boy, how generous is that? I want to ask you this last question because I'm just curious. for you, you've done so much and you still have so much life left to live, but you've done so much already. And the money, I don't think the money is the motivation for you at this point. What is the motivation for you? Why more books and more blogs and more? You've said so much, you've contributed so much. So what continues to make you still continue to march on, bigger, faster, all the things you're doing? Like, what's personally motivating you?
You're not going to believe me if I tell you. It's you. It's you and people like you, Kathy. It's watching people who have so much talent and skill and passion and care get to a new level. And that's what I hold myself to and what I'm hooked on and what I'm trying to accomplish.
You're doing it so well. You're doing it so well. And you're helping all of us. Like, my circle of my friends who I have the most respect for, like, you're the person that we all want to be like, because we want to have integrity and we want to really use whatever influence we have to truly serve. And you're the only person that we can go to for that direction. And that's really kind of amazing.
I'm so lucky to hear you say that, but I'm far from the only person. And
But you're the person.
That's one of the things that makes this moment in time so extraordinary. It was impossible 100 years ago. Who knows what life's going to be like in 10 years? But right now, there are people who are ready to be part of your circle. And when you show up the way you are, and the way you and I met is you decided to lead, and that attracted me to you. And that is where the dancing comes from, is that each one of us has all this leverage and all of these tools, and we shouldn't waste it.
Incredible. You are the best. May you just continue to be blessed with stuff that makes you feel great, and just may you just continue to have the nachas, as my grandmother would say, to know how many people have more courage because of you and take more risks because of you and do better work because of you. The ripple effects are just beyond. Tell us where we can get this book and where we can, I don't know, find whatever else you want to send us to. You do like 7 things, so pick as many as you want.
You made my day all around. Get a sample of the book at trustyourself.com. And you can find out about what Akimbo is building at akimbo.com, Akimbo. I have a podcast at akimbo.link. Or you can just type Seth into your favorite search engine and maybe.
Right? That's the best. Mic drop. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You're the best.